We've been here before, fighting the problems that fight back. But we can shift the status quo, because we see opportunities where others see obstacles. We're change makers and problem solvers, uniting over 1 million minds to address complex issues facing communities around the world, including yours. With passion and purpose, we've led the efforts to put an end to polio. Now eradication isn't just possible, it's plausible. Every day we're investing in a new generation of leaders so we can continue to provide access to clean water, tackle global health concerns, support education, and build the foundations of peace across borders. We're working together as partners and professionals while making friendships that last a lifetime. We're Rotary, and there's no limit to what we can do.
We'll introduce our visitors. Joseph.
Let us pray. O God, your loving hands have given us all that we possess. We thank you for all the blessings you have given to us. We ask you to watch over our city and grant us leaders who will do the best they can for the citizens who need our help. Help us serve our community with grace, and in doing so, may we honor you. We ask all of this in your most holy name. Amen.
If you would please join me in reciting the four-way test. It's over here to my left, your right. It's also on the screen. And so we'll start out. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Rotary Club of Tulsa. We're glad you're here today. We have quite a slew of guests, so I'm going to try and zip through these. As is our custom, when I read your name and your host's name, if you'll stand briefly so that we can take a look at you and sit right back down. We will hold our applause until all have been introduced. Rotarian Diane Peacock has brought with her the previously introduced Joseph Arndt, who is a friend. I don't know if Diane, I think we have an unhosted guest, Don Rossaman. Joe Moore brought with him Debbie Stumps. Sarah Fry has Jason Wise. Tim Caldwell has with him Lee Whitehead, and Tom Byers brought John Points. Greg Keck has with him Dean Glover. Richard Holmes brought John Sacra, a friend. We have another unhosted guest, Bill. Bill. We had 5 people trying to figure this one out. I think it's Dare Roker or something like that, but Bill, we're glad you're here. Karen Keith has Ruth Lamones. Linda Bradshaw has the lovely Wayne Bradshaw, her husband. Kara Gay Neal has with her Judy Wright, the widow of longtime Rotarian Glenn Wright. Jesse Guardiola has with him Alex Gomez. Tom Byers has John Points again. So he is doubly important. Way to go. Marty Alexander has her sister Ann back. Tony Oliva has our foreign exchange student Carlo Iafisco from Milan, Italy. We have some unhosted guests, Steve James, Bill Ballman, Mike Lang, Alan Kelso. Keith Bailey has with him Robert Lambright, Private Bank of Oklahoma, and Rhonda Hayes has her husband Bart Hayes. Let's give all our guests a round of applause. We have 3 visiting Rotarians from the Bristow Club, Mickey Moore. From North Tulsa, Sabrina Ware. And from Sand Springs, Brian Jackson. Thank you all for being here, and please come back.
Thank you, Ed, Joseph, and Carl. Appreciate you. And welcome, visitors. We hope you'll feel welcome today and will consider joining us. The Rotary Club of Tulsa is a great place to make some friends and get involved in the community. You'll be working with, like I said earlier, the finest business and community leaders in town. So if you're interested in what we're doing, see somebody, and we'd love to have you on our team. So thank you to this week's meeting sponsors, whose sponsorships help defray the cost of running this big club. Matthew Bristow with Clear Ridge and Doug Stewart with J.D. Young. Thanks, guys. We appreciate you. And as always, when you have business needs, we hope you'll consider using a Rotarian for your business needs first. And then we want to thank our meeting volunteers this week, those people that are behind the camera like Royal back there that make this meeting run smooth. There's a lot of stuff that goes on the week leading up to this, one of these meetings. So let's thank our volunteers. They earned their keep this week. This has been a busy week, so I appreciate them. Now I would ask that past President Muzan Biggs come to the podium. I've asked Muzan if he wouldn't mind sharing a few reflections on Dr. Martin Luther King, since Monday was Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Muzan?
Actually, President Mike said I have 8 minutes to do this. I grew up in the Jim Crow South, just outside a small East Texas oil and gas town, where every public restroom was clearly marked white or colored. Every water fountain was clearly marked white or colored. And it was understood that if a black person and a white person met on a sidewalk, the black person was to step off and let the white person step forward. But when I was born, a young man was playing quarterback for Booker T. Washington High School in Atlanta, Georgia, who would change this country forever. From high school, he went on to Morehouse College in Atlanta. When he was graduated, he and his parents decided he should go north. He went to Crozer Theological School in Pennsylvania. It was the first integrated school he'd ever attended. But in his 3-year program there, he was #1 student and the first African-American student body president in its history. That opened the door for our United Methodist Seminary at Boston University to invite him to join their doctoral program. He was graduated with a PhD when he was still only 26 years old. He went to a rather small Baptist church, Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, Alabama. Everything was going well until one cold December day when he suddenly got a call that one of the members of his church had worked hard all day, had gotten on a city bus. She moved to the back of the bus where black people were supposed to sit, but when the front of the bus filled up with white people, a white man demanded that she get up and give him her seat. Rosa Parks refused. The bus driver heard the commotion in the back, called the police, and Rosa Parks was hauled off to jail. Dr. King invited all the black religious leaders he knew to come to his church that night to figure out what to do to support Rosa Parks. They decided on a boycott of city busing, and 20,000 people said they would not ride the bus again until this horrible situation was corrected. For 13 long months, black people got up at all hours of the night so they could walk to work, even though some carpools were organized, and many of the city buses ran empty for 13 months, at which time the Supreme Court stepped in and said, from this point on, throughout the United States, public transportation shall be open to first come, first serve. Dr. King's next big challenge occurred in the largest, most prosperous city in Alabama, Birmingham, when a group of people there wanted to address some of the grievances, and he went to help. This was the city of the infamous Bull Connor, and he turned German Shepherd police dogs and water cannon loose on the black people. And for the first time, many Americans saw on their television 5:30 news that evening what was going on in Alabama. Dr. King was arrested along with others and put in jail. From his experience there, he would write one of his most famous works, A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. There was a new attorney general in Washington named Robert Kennedy. He was called to see if he would intervene. He made a call. Not much was done, so he asked his brother to make a call. And when President Kennedy called, Dr. King and his group in prison were treated much better and soon released. 1964, the year after the assassination of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr. faced down with the President Lyndon Johnson and told him that we must have a Civil Rights Act. He pushed Johnson until he finally agreed to do everything in his power to make it happen, and the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. But the one thing the president would not go along with was opening voting to all black people across the country. So a year later, Dr. King and those who worked with him on these social issues decided to make Selma, Alabama, a focus of their efforts. There were 30,000 black people in Selma, and only 350 had ever been allowed to vote in any election. They chose Selma partly because they had a police chief like Bull Connors, and they really hoped they could get that police chief on the 5:30 news. They didn't have long to wait. He was a member of the KKK, and he waded into them with every force he had. Enough people saw the news that 500 people came to join in a march that Dr. King said would go all the way from Selma to the capital city, more than 40 miles away. And when those 500 started across the Pettus Bridge, the governor of the state, George Wallace, had sent out 60 state troopers, many of them on horseback, and they started clubbing people in the head. One young Unitarian preacher who had come all the way from Connecticut to be supportive and to march with Dr. King was beaten to death the night before. When all of that hit the 5:30 news, things began to change. Now, high-profile people decided they would go to Selma, Alabama, from Harry Belafonte to Sidney Poitier to Tony Bennett. Rabbi Itzhak Greenberg and many other Jews were there, a Roman Catholic bishop, many clergy from United Methodist, Lutheran, Episcopalian, Presbyterian. In fact, there were 1,500 ready to march the second time. And this time, President Lyndon Johnson called Governor George Wallace and said, "If one person is hurt, I will hold you accountable." And George Wallace understood that and sent out 400 people to protect the marchers all the way from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. Just last Thursday, Gail and I were in Washington, D.C. again. The weather had finally gotten warm enough that day that we decided to walk around the tidal basin to see the Vietnam Memorial, the Korean War Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial. And as you start on around the tidal basin, you come to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. 4 acres right on the tidal basin. The design taken from his I Have a Dream speech, where he prayed that someday from the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. From the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. A huge block of granite, 30 feet tall, was brought to the site, and a huge cut made through it so that the center section could be moved forward from the 2 side sections, and on the center section, an engraving, a statue of Dr. King. And on either side, in granite panels, some of his most famous sayings in the years of making all those speeches, writing 5 books. I want to read just a few. Justice is equal treatment under the law. Justice is equal opportunity to succeed. A reporter asked him, "Is it true you're a non-aggressive person?" And he said, "Oh no, I'm very aggressive, but I'm nonviolent." True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The tensions are not really between the races, between the forces of justice and injustice. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. When Dr. King's birthday was made a national holiday, I immediately called the commemoration committee here in Tulsa and invited them to have the first celebration at the Boston Avenue Church. They accepted our invitation. I made it very clear that we were to have greeters at every door, welcoming every person into our church. And year after year, I extended the invitation again, and year after year was accepted. Again this year, the Commemoration Society had their celebration Sunday night at Boston Avenue Church. But in all those years I sat on the dais as senior minister, one of my favorite parts was hearing a high school student give the I Have a Dream speech. They had to do it without notes, just stand up and do it, word for word. Many of those who had won the competition were children of black clergy here in our city, sons and daughters. They were well-dressed, articulate, capable. But one year I walked into the parlor to be lined up with the other platform guests, and I saw the young man who had been chosen that year. His coat didn't match his slacks. The sleeves of his coat, too short. The sleeves of his white shirt, too long. He was wringing his hands. He was scared to death. I walked over to him, introduced myself, and said, "I have the privilege of sitting by you tonight. Really looking forward to hearing you." Just before he was about to be introduced, he leaned over to me and said, "I need a drink of water." And I said, "I never used water when I was preaching. There's no time for water. They're about to introduce you." And when he was introduced, he stepped up to the mic and stood there as if he were absolutely scared to death. And I heard one of my black brothers say quietly, "Make Dr. King proud, son." And he began 50 years ago. The man in whose shadow we meet today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And then Dr. King went on to say how many promises had never been realized and how they had gathered that day to cash their delinquent check. He went on to talk about some of the greatest problems in our country. He spoke about that mountain of despair, maybe someday becoming a stone of hope. And then he kept talking about maybe someday we will come to that moment that all of us remember, he said, from a Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. And every person in that sanctuary was on his or her feet. But it'll take every one of us to make that happen. Thank you.
Muzan, thank you. You are a blessing to this club and this community, and you did Dr. King proud, and we appreciate that. Dr. King was a light in a very dark time in our history, but we all have a lot to learn from him, and so we wanted to honor him at our meeting today. Tony, we're going to skip the video, okay? Okay, thanks. Okay, announcements today. Fireside meetings are next week. As past president Linda Bradshaw has been encouraging us to do, let's get fired up, okay? Our goal is to have 150 people signed up, and we've got 3 days to do that. And so please go to DACDB or grab Linda as she tries to get out of the meeting, and let's get signed up and support. We have some wonderful hosts who have stepped up, and we've got some great questions that we need to be discussing as a club, so I would encourage you, please sign up for a fireside meeting. And don't forget, there's a drawing for 2 tickets to the 25th Annual Henry P. Ibis Citizen Athlete Awards banquet in June. Rotary Club of Tulsa is celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. And Sabrina, thank you so much for being here today. Our club, for those of you that don't know, our club sponsored the Northside Club. And so we've got a long history there, a long, solid relationship. They are having a celebration on January 26th at the Greenwood Cultural Center and have invited everyone to attend. And so if you're able to, it's a Friday evening, I believe, see Sabrina after the meeting. Or you can go to their Facebook page. I was on their Facebook page the other day, and there's information there on how to sign up. So congratulations, President Sabrina, on a great club. We appreciate you guys. Yeah. Again, I'd like to offer our condolences to Joni Stevenson. She's here this week. Her mother passed away last week. We were not able to get cards out last week, so we have cards on the table to jot Joni a note of encouragement. And then I wanted to reiterate, we still need hosts for Scry students the weekend of Friday night the 26th again, and then Saturday morning the 27th. So if you can host a student, high school student, see Jerry Stamper or Alicia Herrera or Tricia. And Tricia has a list, so she can take... Yep. While you're first see Linda, then Tricia, and then you can leave. Okay. Committee meetings today. Communications is meeting in room 233, and then ONOEL meets in room 234. Good to have you here today, Mickey. Appreciate you. Charles? I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Well, I made a great investment back in December, and I'm wearing it. You can't see it, but it's keeping me pretty warm. Yeah, so.
Oh, okay, good.
No.
Good
so
thinking,
that's a
man.
good thing. I like to
Yeah,
make
you
good
had your
investments.
Farmer's Almanac out then, huh?
That's right.
Yeah.
I read ahead.
Yeah, good for
Good
you.
thing.
Good for you.
How's everybody doing? All right, good to hear. Let's get started. The Sarge fines are coming up. First up, Mr. Ben Windham. Are you here today? There we go, sir. Thank you very much. $100 fine for his birthday. Happy birthday. It's going to be earmarked for water wells. We all know how important water wells is to this club, and we're excited to put the money towards that. So thank you, sir, very much, and we hope you have a great birthday. Next up, happy birthday, Rhonda. Rhonda with her new hubby over here and has a wonderful picture of her family. $100 fine. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Was it today? Tomorrow. So tomorrow. All right, very good. All right, Matt Davis. Where's Matt? There he is. Matt's daughter just turned 30 years old, so Matt did $30. She's out in Hollywood, correct? Yeah, you can see. So anyway, congratulations on raising a beautiful daughter and out there doing you proud. So thank you for the fine. Now this is what I was really excited about this one. My good friend Phil, he sent me this picture. Look how happy he is. This is his wedding picture. I mean, he's like literally has this picture of anticipation, excitement, and his wife's going, you better make a lot of money in my lifetime, you know? So you better take care of business. But nonetheless, $100, happy anniversary, Phil, to you. It's very fun. And last but certainly not least, Tiffany, our good friend. She lined it up pretty good. It's $160, so we got to get this right. Tiffany had gone through a foot problem a while back, needing crutches and assistance and everything, so it's kind of tying in together. So, happy birthday, Tiffany, for $43. I won't say if that related to age or not. No weight-bearing days for 17, so that was 17 days, $17. And $100 for everybody who had helped her, which I think her mom was her primary help. I saw her and her mom together. And I grabbed this picture off here because she's with Harry Connick Jr., her husband, and look how happy Harry is to be with her and enjoying it. I mean, it's a celebrity who really cares about his fan base and all that, right? So then I have to segue over to the Sarge Picture of the Week, because I meet celebrities, and I had the chance to meet Huey Lewis a while back, and look at his face on here. He's like, can you get away from me as soon as possible? I'm all excited. I think this picture's great, right? And then here's Huey's going, no, I do not believe in love. So anyway, thank you all very much. You all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, Rotarian of the Day today is Keith Bailey. Keith is retired from Williams, but continues to serve on a number of corporate and nonprofit boards. Keith has been a member of our club since 2004. He is a Paul Harris Fellow and a Community Foundation Fellow. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Keith Bailey.
Since Chuck was here 3 years ago, and many of you have already come up and said that since that time you have consumed every book he has written, I don't know that he really needs an introduction, and I've been instructed by certain members of the club that my introduction of Chuck should be shorter than President Mike's introduction of me. So let me just give some highlights since the last time that he was here. He received a Wrangler Award from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum for the best Western novel, and the award was given last year. He is a recognized author because he's won an Edgar Award, and anybody that reads any mystery books know that that's kind of the Academy Award of mystery writers. Well, he has now had a book debut on #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, which is the award that every writer covets. He and Lori have moved back to Saratoga, and that's where he and Lori got their start when he was out of college and starting with the local newspaper. But best of all, and I think this is the highlight in their life, he's added another woman to his family. Ivy, their granddaughter, has been added since the last time, and they just spent time with her and are looking forward to the trip back because I suspect they may see her again. So with no further ado, please help me welcome C.J. Chuck Box.
Thank you all very much. It's great to be back here. You know, Keith is a pretty persuasive guy. So when he brought this up and told me how many of you had were at the last time I was here and have since read the books, that made me feel good about coming back. And I've met a lot of people here today who said they've read all the books since. So thank you all very much. It's good to have a reminder that Wyoming is not one of the coldest places in the country. So thanks for welcoming us back. And Keith and Pat, thanks for hosting us for this. We have a good time. Keith arranged yesterday for us to go to the Gilcrease Museum for the whole afternoon, and it was fantastic. Really loved it. So I thought since last time I was here, I talked a little bit about the books in general and just kind of the writing in general, that I'd kind of drill down a little bit so you didn't have to hear the same thing twice. And one of the questions I'm always asked, not only from journalists and interviewers, but also from aspiring writers, is, you know, where do you get your ideas? You know, because now we're talking 24 published books since 2000. the year 2000, and people just want to know, where do they come from? And if it's aspiring writers, they ask that question because they think, if I know the secret to this answer, then I too will become a best-selling author. But that's not the case. But I did want to talk a little bit about kind of an origin story, and because it leads right back to the new book that's going to come out in March, and Keith alluded to it. When I first got out of college, I went to the University of Denver. My first job out of college was working as a newspaper reporter in Saratoga, Wyoming. And Saratoga's in south central Wyoming, tiny little town, fascinating place. But it all kind of started, how different and interesting this place was, is that my job interview took place in a boat floating down the North Platte River, catching fish and drinking beer with the publisher. And by the time we got to town, I thought, I will pay him for this job. And so my first job was making like less than minimum wage for a little tiny newspaper called the Saratoga Sun that came out every single week. And as a small town, all kind of general reporter, you do everything. And I would interview billionaires, of which there are a few around this certain part of the country and in Saratoga. The next day I'd be interviewing an old guy in encampment who was waiting for the end times, who showed me all the grenades in his basement so he could kill the commies. And then the next day it would be taking photos of the 4-H winning cow for the paper, and then whitewater, because it's an outdoor area, whitewater rafting, hunting, fishing, ice fishing. And I've since told people, aspiring writers especially, when they want to know which way to go, how to get training, how to get published, I say, drop out of the MFA program in college and get a job as a newspaper reporter in a small town. So at least one part of your life you'll know about real life. And I ascribe to that, and I think that and I've since learned, most of the authors that I really like to read started out as newspaper reporters somewhere, or journalists somewhere, and it's because it's a different kind of training. It's coming at that business in a different way, as opposed to, quote, creative writing and MFA programs. So I really cherish that, and the 4 years that I was a newspaper reporter doing these things, I'm still drawing on all of those experiences for every new book. And I can go back. At the time, I didn't realize I was in training for future novels, but now I realize it when I look back. And it really did mean a lot. So when I was working on the newspaper reporter, trying to get going, I knew I wanted to write novels. I had to come up with, who's a protagonist, basically. And I wanted to tell this story that was based on a real event. In Wyoming growing up, there used to be posters everywhere of this little creature called a black-footed ferret. And it would say, if you see this animal, call this number, because they thought that the black-footed ferret was extinct. And finally, a colony of these things were found at a little place outside Meeteetse, Wyoming. And what was so fascinating to me was, as a reporter, was that everybody in this town knew about these creatures, but no one had made the call. And then, of course, the feds rushed in, the biologists rushed in, and what happened to that little community after that, I thought, was a new, very interesting Western story about the modern West and endangered species. So I wanted to write this story, and I was trying to figure out how to do it. And originally, the protagonist was going to be a sheriff, and that didn't work for me. And then the protagonist was going to be a journalist, newspaper reporter, which is what I was. But as I was trying to figure this out, puzzle it out, I was doing ride-alongs with the local game warden in Saratoga, Wyoming. And game wardens in Wyoming are very, very unique in that they're very autonomous. A lot of them have districts of 1,500 to 2,000 square miles. They're very heavily armed. They can never get backup because they're so remote. Almost everyone they encounter out in the field is armed. They actually encounter more armed people than even an inner-city police officer, because everybody out there has guns, and they need to deal with things in different ways. Plus, they're not involved not only in law enforcement, but also in resource management, landowner relations, all sorts of different things. Game wardens in the Mountain West have a certain level of status that they don't in other parts of the country. And they travel around in their green pickups with their Labradors, almost all of them. And while I was trying to puzzle out this book, I realized I'm going on ride-alongs with the best protagonist, the best window into this issue. So I wrote this book called Open Season, which I didn't call it Open Season, I called it Joe Pickett at the time, because I never thought I was writing the first book in a series. There's now 18 books in the series, but at the time, there was a book about the Endangered Species Act. I never thought the world is just waiting for a Wyoming game warden series, and I'm the guy who can deliver this to everyone. But luckily, when the first book came out, everything I was told that would not happen with the first novel did happen, in that it was a New York Times notable book, it went into 4 printings, it was optioned for movies, etc., and thus the series began. The publisher came to me and said, "We'd like you to write 2 more Joe Pickett books." And I said, "Sure." And I tried to figure out what they would be about, and went on. So that was 18 years ago. The new book that is going to come out in March, Joe Pickett, who's based in a place called Saddle String, Wyoming, in the Bighorn Mountains, is given an assignment by the new Wyoming governor to go 300 miles south to a little town called Saratoga and to investigate the disappearance of a very rich British PR executive woman who has left the most exclusive dude ranch in the country and vanished, and it's become a national incident, thus the title, The Disappeared. So 18 books in, Joe Pickett goes to Saratoga, which is the town I always thought he was in anyway. And, but this time he goes there by name. So I think there's a photo of when he arrives in town. And I was just going to read a very, very short passage. This is Joe Pickett. This happens in January in Wyoming, which usually is colder than Tulsa, but not this year. He drove back downtown and turned onto Main and slid into a diagonal space in front of the Hotel Wolf. The building was a three-story Victorian structure constructed of red brick with a covered front porch and lonely chairs and benches. The windows to the bar on the right side glowed warm yellow. He knew that the hotel rented rooms, although he didn't have a reservation. He didn't figure it would be necessary in January, and, judging by the few parked cars along the small downtown, he'd made the right guess. As he reached down to open his door, the front door of the Wolf opened and 3 cowboys came out. 2 wore wide-brimmed hats, Carhartt parkas, and Sorel pack boots. The third man, who was older, pulled on a wool rancher's cap with ear flaps. When they saw his mud and ice-encrusted pickup, the 3 of them paused for a moment and stared. Joe waved hello through the windshield. They waved back and moved on, hunched over against the cold. He noted that the 3 of them gave him a second look over their shoulder before they entered the rustic bar down the street. He knew within hours that word would be out via the cowboys there was a new game warden in town. So, with that, I thought Keith had asked that we leave plenty of time for maybe some questions. I think last time we ran out of time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the book, the Joe Pickett series, the books, the standalones, writing in general, anything. Yes, sir. Correct. Yeah, there's standalone books. There's one called, the first one's called Blue Heaven. That's the one that won the Edgar Award that Keith mentioned. It's set in North Idaho. So they're all set, the standalones are all set outside the state of Wyoming. They tend to be a little darker, but they do interconnect. There's one book called The Highway about a long-haul trucker who's a serial killer based on real incidents. That's this by far the creepiest book I've ever written. And those who've read it, a lot of them say it's the creepiest book they've ever read. But they're not Joe Pickett books because of where they take place and so on. But those are, yes, so there's 6 of those. And a book of short stories as well. They're actually with a different publisher, so that's unusual. Yes.
You mentioned that you went to school in Colorado and you lived there. Have you lived in other parts of the United States, and has that made it easier to write about other areas?
Grew up in Wyoming, born in Wyoming, and then went away to school to the University of Denver. And then my first job out of there was back to Wyoming, to Saratoga. I've traveled a lot, but I haven't lived in other parts of the U.S. Up until the books took off, my wife and I owned a company where we actually promoted international inbound tourism from Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, into the U.S. So we did a lot of international travel, but we haven't lived in other parts of the U.S. But through actually hosting foreign journalists and tour operators, I learned a lot about where I lived more than I did. Because if you're in a van with a bunch of French journalists that are pointing out things that you might not have noticed before, like elk hanging from trees that in a hunting lodge where a bunch of French journalists walked into the woods because they have to smoke a cigarette every 5 minutes, and they all came boiling out because they walked into an elk hunting camp and they'd never seen animals hanging from trees before. And I thought, those are the kind of things I need, those kind of details are the kind of things I need to make sure in the books because they aren't that unusual to me, but for outside readers they are. So I always try to keep a mind open. Yes?
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here. And
My pleasure.
I have two questions. One, have you always worn a cowboy hat? And the second question is why?
Because I have as much hair as you do. So yes, I have. Yes, in the back. They are interesting. I mean, most of them basically retire as state employees, around 64, 65. But I've met a lot of game wardens in Wyoming and Montana, and the portrayal of their day-to-day lives in the books is really pretty accurate. Not necessarily always going after killers every other day, but just being out. The fact that it's hard on families and their wives how much they're gone, and game wardens have to rely on their families to be their unpaid administrative support, basically answering the phones, taking notes, meeting angry hunters when the game warden's out. So it's kind of a hard life, but rarely do they ever quit because they're so into it. And I still go on ride-alongs with game wardens, and I enjoy it. They have interesting lives. Yes?
Do you have a daily writing habit, or do you just bust out a book before your deadline?
No, I try to write every day. My process is, first I start with the issue. That's how I always look at the book still. The issue meaning, is it about wind energy? Is it about environmental terrorism? Is it about, what issue is it? I research the issue. Then I do a long outline, bullet point outline, then start writing. And when I write at least 1,000 words every day, usually more than that, 1,500 to 2,000. And then I just keep pounding away. An average book is 80 to 100,000 words. So conceivably, I should be able to write a book every 3 months, but I don't. That's not right. But so I just 1,000 words a day, 1,000. I worry more about the word count than the hours. Sure. Yes.
How did you come up with Nate, and how did you choose to use him or not?
Nate Romanowski is, he's an outlaw falconer with a special forces background who appeared in the third book and has been hanging around ever since. And he also carries the largest, it's actually in dispute what the largest handgun in the world is, but the one he has is close to that, and he's a good shot with it. And he's one of the few characters actually based on a real person. He's based on a friend of mine I grew up with in high school in Wyoming he was the middle linebacker, big blonde guy, went to the Air Force Academy, and he was a falconer, and I used to go falconry hunting with him. And he's still around, and the experiences I spent with him hunting with falcons I still use in the books. And there are falconers all over the U.S., and a lot of them read these books because they're not that many books with falconers in them. And the premier organization's the California Hawking Club. And they made me an honorary member a couple years ago, and they use my passages in their newsletters and stuff, so it's official. But I've never been a falconer. Yes?
How has the new technology impacted your business from a business perspective?
New technology meaning digital books? Is that what you mean? E-books? It's impacted it in a good way. There are some authors who will kind of whine and cry about books not all being hardcover books and available, but the fact is there's more books being published and consumed and read right now than at any time in history. That's because the access is so great because of e-books. And the agreement struck between the publishers and the e-book people is the same percentages as if it's a hardcover book. So the author does well by that. So it's been good. Yes?
Will you tell us, off the record,
Off the record?
yes, off the record, how Joe's pickup gets destroyed in the next book?
Yeah. I'm not going to tell you that. You have to buy it to find out. But I do, he does, a couple of books ago, I know he was lamenting the fact that he's got this reputation for all these, every vehicle he has gets wrecked somehow. And he makes the point that it's not always him. It's sometimes just outside forces. He's in Yellowstone Park and all of a sudden a brand new geyser erupts through the parking lot into his truck. That's not his fault. Yes? In this genre or in general? Either way. My favorite author is Thomas McGuane. Kind of writes literary books in Montana, but always been a favorite. Cormac McCarthy's another one. So many. Wallace Stegner. Most of the writers are kind of in Western, whether it's literary or not. In this genre, I'm a big fan of John Sanford, Denise Mina, several of the, Michael Connelly. Almost too many to count. I've got a long list here, so later, if you want to see the long list, I'll be happy to show you. Yes? Well, it's challenging, but it's also rewarding because before you have a book contract, everything you do is on spec. So it's nice to know that, it's actually going to be published this time. So that's a pretty good feeling. But it is, I remember it was really, because the time in publishing takes so long, the second book was submitted before the first book was out. So I had no idea what kind of reception there would be out there for the very first book. Luckily, it was really good, but it could have been bad, and that's, the publisher, it's a pretty cold world. You're as good as the sales of your last book, basically. Yes?
You're known for your character development so that everybody feels like they know Mary Beth and the girls and me. All your regular readers know that Mary Beth can't have any more children. Is there any regret on your part that there's never going to be a Joe Jr., a son?
No. You know what? You're the first. Congratulations! You're the first person to ever ask that question. But no, there isn't, because I like the way the rest of the family has grown up organically in real time. There's daughters, of course, so there could be potentially grandchildren. But no, I like the way I like the way it's gone that way. What an interesting question. Good job. Yes. I was really impressed, and this is going to, it's not a very sophisticated take, but I grew up, I remember as a little boy looking at Remington and Russell prints in a book, and I didn't realize that I'd just sort of memorized the details of them until I was there yesterday and saw the originals right there, and that to me just blew me away. I know that there's a lot more to the museum than those classic Remington and Russell, but to me that brought it all home. And we even, luckily, through Keith and his connections, were able to go into the storage area, into the archives. And they've got so much great art that some of the great art I remember is actually down there tucked away, not seen by the public, because they have so much. It's amazing to me. Oh, in the back, yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, Game Warden, yes. Okay, big news. Not necessarily a movie, although Blue Heaven has been, once again, it's been optioned for a movie, but I don't know if anything's going with that. But right now, Paramount Television has purchased all of the Joe Pickett books to develop a TV series. And the producer's in charge. Oh, thanks. We've had this opportunity several times over the last few years, but we think there's finally the right people in charge of it. And the producer is the guy, he's won Academy Awards, and his name's Doug Wick. He did Gladiator along other movies, but he's read every book. Everybody on the team has read every book. They want to do them realistically in order and want me involved with it. And so it's finally the right deal, I think. And so right now they're in the process of getting what they call a showrunner and a writer, so it's in development. So we're excited about that. Hope they do it right. If they don't, yeah. If they don't, they wrote me a big check. Yes, I'm sorry. They're very unusual. I honestly have a lot of strong women characters in all the books. Certainly Joe Pickett's wife is the smartest person of the two, and he's got 3 strong personality daughters. And in addition to that, so the standalones that I mentioned, I've been writing a series with a female protagonist named Cassie Duell, who writing from a female perspective, which is always interesting for anybody, for a man. But so far, it's like the dog that hasn't barked. Nobody points out that it doesn't work. So I have very strong women characters, and anybody who's read the books knows that. Yes. Yes, you do. I know. Well, you can start right over here. Yes. It's how lightly. It's done one time by my editor who's for like major things, character development, maybe rearranging chapters, kind of big stuff. I've never had a whole overhaul of a book ever. Some writers have. And then the copy editors is 4 different levels of copy editors. There's still errors after all of that. And then you know, if you find an error or reader points one out, then you change it in the next edition or next printing. But at least 4 times it's seen by people who've not read it previously. Thank you all very much. And thanks Keith and Pat for inviting us again. There's books over here. I'd be happy to sign anything that you either purchased or might have brought, and I'll answer any other questions because we've run out of time. Thank you.
CJ, thank you for coming all the way from Wyoming and battling the bitter cold to spend some time with us. You always have a warm place to come in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so we appreciate you. You know, Keith turned me on to your books, and I started reading them a year or so ago. And I love the West, and I love how your writing transforms me back to the West. You have such a gift with words, and we appreciate that. So thank you very much. So I would also like, speaking of strong women, there are 2 strong women in these gentlemen's lives that are here today that I'd like to introduce. Pat Bailey, Keith's wife, and then Lori Box. If you 2 will stand up, please. the masterminds behind the masters, they would tell you, I'm sure. And so our speaker book this week is The Invisible Boy, and that will be donated to our adopted school, Celia Clinton. Thank you for jotting a note in there. And then I have my personally autographed copy, because I got to sit next to CJ today. So yeah, please come over here. Magic City Books it has plenty of books for sale, and CJ, you're going to autograph those if they want, right? Yeah, so that'd be great. That would be great. So one announcement that I forgot to go over real quick is, remember, January is membership month. We've got a special going on, so any new member that joins in January get a discount of $200 on the initiation fee. So let's get some new members signed up to hear some of these great programs that we have here. Our program next week will be our four-way, we'll hear from the winner of our four-way speech contest, and we're also going to hear some music from Helpful Harmonies. First of all, the four-way speech contest, I mean, I promise you will be inspired by what this young lady has to say, so please come for that. And then the Helpful Harmonies for Wellness is a group through the Signature Symphony that focuses on sensory-friendly performances, and they're out changing lives with people that have like Alzheimer's and stuff. And so that's going to be a great little add-on to our four-way speech competition. And then the following week on January 31st, our program will hear how the George Kaiser Family Foundation has again spearheaded a program that is being piloted right here in Tulsa. This program will have a positive impact on our city and state for generations to come. Two speakers from the George Kaiser Family Foundation, and then Mayor G.T. Bynum will speak about BEST, which is the Birth Through 8 strategy. That'll help break the cycle of poverty and turn it into a cycle of opportunity. So this will be the place to come to hear about that first off. So again, CJ, we appreciate you coming here today, and now I encourage all of you, go out, tell your Rotary story, and don't forget to bring a friend to Rotary next week. We are dismissed.